Hi there. Hope you're having a lovely day so far. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard of adrenal fatigue before? Well, this actually happens when our adrenal glands become so overworked from chronic stress that our body can no longer produce the essential hormones, and many of our bodily functions become sort of overworked and compromised. Now, the stay-at-home era that we're living through at the moment, for all its wonderful benefits of having us supposedly slow down a little and not running around as much, has in fact increased workloads, pressures, and stresses to many households, which is something that the media are not really talking about much at the moment. So we're here today to help show our support and share with you some expert tips to help prevent or overcome burnout whilst home in isolation. And to talk to us about this today is our special guest, Krissy Regan. Now, Krissy is founder of Mindful Mums Queensland and the author of the new book, Broken to Unbreakable, 12 Steps to Unbreakable Mind, Body and Spirit. Now, Krissy will chat to us about numerous natural and proven stress busting techniques that you can try to reduce or even prevent burnout from occurring. Now, thank you so much for joining us today, Krissy. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm great. Thank you.
Now, you're a very busy lady. You're a mother of two kids. You're juggling the demands of a household, as well as being a businesswoman where you're the global projects director for a UK firm, and you manage and overseas projects in Europe and UK, Africa, and all from your home office here in Australia. So that being said, you've actually suffered from and overcome from burnout before. So can you tell us what was your experience with this and how did you recognize and then overcome it?
Well, it's fair to say that burnout manifests differently for different people, but I think my symptoms were quite classic. Exhausted but unable to sleep, feeling overwhelmed and stressed and living in constant state of flight or fight, having a mindset of time scarcity where there was never enough hours in the day to get things done. And that is kind of the mental side of burnout. The physical side of burnout is aches and pains, slow digestion, congested mottled skin, poor functioning liver. I had plantar fasciitis, backache, all of these symptoms which need to be looked at with a very holistic eye, because if you present to a GP with any one of those symptoms, you might get given a painkiller or an antidepressant or something, but actually they're an overarching symptoms that lead to or actually mask adrenal fatigue and indeed adrenal burnout. And I have read articles myself where it's one of the most underdiagnosed conditions that actually exists, because there's no one test to pinpoint it exactly. But I did a lot of research myself. I recognized that I was suffering with all of those conditions, and I wanted to do something about it. And so I started researching all my symptoms individually, and then things fell into place, and I recognized that as a high-performing, busy person, I had been suffering and I had burnt out my body as well as my mind and indeed my emotional side of my life. So I kind of I hit the wall, as it were.
So what you're saying, there is a list of different things that actually constitute of suffering from burnout. It's not just one particular thing, and it's the process of connecting all of those dots and understanding they're not isolated so much. They're actually all together. They do actually constitute you being burnt out. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, correct. You know, it's a holistic condition, and a lot of autoimmune illnesses are, you know, conditions that affect a multitude of different areas of our body. You know, even through weak hair and congested skin, you would just think, oh, well, I'm having a breakout, or my hair's feeling really weak, or I've just had a baby and I'm breastfeeding and all my hair's falling out. But actually, these are symptomatic of a much bigger underlying condition, which is caused by stress and overwork and lack of self-care and lack of sleep. but over time it can manifest and indeed cause, kind of more chronic illnesses, because once your adrenal glands are burnt out, your body doesn't function in an optimal way, which is what I found.
And previously, you've studied exercise science and sports management, and you've spent the last 20 years managing projects for clients all around the world. So I'd love to know, in your experience, have you ever noticed a common theme or thread with the types of people that suffer from burnout?
I think it's people with a very giving nature, where you're used to giving and giving to others and not necessarily looking or going inward and giving to yourself. I would say a lot of high performing people who are working, really hard all for long periods of time, who aren't necessarily so introspective. They're more kind of outward looking. So I think I found myself kind of in that headspace. Also, probably people who aren't necessarily have the skills or the understanding to manage their thoughts and emotions. And I found myself probably in that bracket, where I would let my thoughts and emotions control me, as opposed to me controlling my thoughts and emotions. And, often it's that classic symptoms of, being busy is a badge of honor, working hard, is kind of your motto, and meeting other people's needs becomes your measure of self-worth and self-value. And that kind of impacts a lot on how you care for yourself and what measures you put in place to kind of look after yourself. And over, I'd say, more than a decade, I had let a lot of those areas slip in my life, where I was more focused on others than I was on myself.
In your opinion, why do you think so many people suffer from burnout?
Well, we live a 24/7 life, and it's we live at a relatively frenetic pace. I think the switching off the busyness is a real skill, and having the mindset of resisting the urge to get busy and to take on more things is something that we can all kind of learn and adopt. And it's something that COVID has taught us, to actually just stop and, to focus on what's around us is most important. And also to prioritize our health and well-being. And we don't actually do that. In society today, it's not necessarily talked about enough, prioritizing your own health and well-being, and also being accountable for your health and well-being. We like to outsource everything in this day and age, so we need to kind of bring it back to home.
Now, I've personally suffered from burnout many times, far too many times than I would like to admit. And I can say from personal experience, it's not nice, and it's pretty scary, actually, and disappointing, mainly because I, for so many times, didn't listen to my body and didn't take any notice of the warning signs that my body was giving me. And I guess the lesson here for everyone listening is the fact that burnout is preventable, but you have to know what the signs are and what to do about them. So the question really is, what are the common signs of burnout that a parent, say home in isolation, may be feeling at the moment, and really what should they do to overcome all of those things?
Mm-hmm. Well, I expect there's a lot of parents burning the midnight oil at the moment and feeling stressed about life and the situations that they can't control, because there's a lot more pressures in the home environment. So managing stress is one important element of preventing burnout. Stress management, good practices in stress management, which is not overthinking, not ruminating, not getting caught up in in thinking about negative thoughts and being grateful for what we have, which is spending time with our kids and with our families, and to focus on the positives, as opposed to, absorbing all the negativity and the stress and the anguish that's going on in the world right now. You need to kind of create a little bit of a protective bubble around you, and to really kind of focus on the health and wellness in your immediate circle.
Mm-hmm. And I guess going back to what you were saying before, when we are stressed, our immune system really does take a hit, because the stress lowers our natural immunity. So in saying that, given the time of year, with winter just around the corner, I guess a lot of parents who are experiencing or approaching burnout at the moment, juggling all of those different things at the moment with homeschooling and, all of the things around the household, maybe, multiple children, a multi-generational household, that they actually have their parents and grandparents in the house, all different things, and the stresses potentially even with job losses and all kinds of things at the moment. There's a whole multitude of stresses that we are living through at the moment. So burnout also doesn't necessarily mean that it's just because if you're not working, there's different things happening around the household, let's face it, at the moment. So in saying that, with people experiencing or approaching burnout and approaching winter, they may end up getting sick, I guess, at the worst possible time with colds and flus. And of course, God forbid, any potential exposure to COVID-19. And I know myself, and everyone knows that when you are more run down, and then when you do get a cold, flu or some other bug, that it takes so much more effort, and it's harder to actually have your body recuperate and get back to a place of being in optimum health. So for many parents, we know also that they don't have the time to be sick, and they just keep dragging themselves sort of through the situation, and those times when they should be in bed and resting, that they drag themselves out of bed. But if we continue to push through life in this perpetual fight or flight type of scenario, our body's eventually going to crash and burn, I guess. So what are your thoughts on all of that, I guess?
So since before COVID really kicked off, my philosophy has been to focus on building your immunity. So to build your immunity, you can prioritize sleep, try to minimize stress, and to improve the quality of the food that you're using to nourish your body, but also to exercise, because through exercising we are stressing our bodies and creating new cells. So when we create new cells, we build new immunity and resistance. So those are kind of simple things. Not only are they good for self-care, but they're also very good for building immunity. And having those conversations with your family around the dinner time and a dinner table, or at the start of each week, and I developed this, what I like to call my little wellness mindset checklist, because if you have a wellness mindset as you're going into the week or even going into the day, you can kind of mentally check yourself. Is this within the best interests of my health and well-being? Have I prioritized my sleep today? Have I prioritized nourishing my body? Am I getting rest and exercise? And am I kind of looking out for myself? And when you start to kind of show up for yourself in an accountable way on a daily basis, that in itself builds your immune system. And even the simple act of being grateful builds your immune system. So, saying some gratitude prayers at night, or even saying grace at the table with your family, or sitting down at the end of the day and making a note of what you're thankful for, will indeed also build your immune system. So it's not just things on a physical level or a nutritional level, it's also on a mental and a spiritual level that we can raise our immune system.
I love that, a wellness mindset. And I think that we are so, as you said earlier on about the badge of honor and accepting of life being busy all the time, that we actually put everything else before, our wellness and that I guess aspect of actually putting ourselves first. It's always, our jobs, the money, the stress, and everything else that supports it. But at the end of the day, what we think about, we bring about, and that can be good and bad. But I think that's a very important message that you're giving us, that we actually need to be able to have a strong focus on that being, I guess, our number one priority for our family and for ourselves. That if we aren't sort of strong in our mind, body and spirit, what do we have at the end of the day? So I think having a wellness mindset is a very, very powerful message. So thank you for sharing that with us. And that's something that I'm definitely going to be taking away and implementing into my life following this chat today. Now, we published your article, and the title is Self-Care Tips to Prevent Burnout. Perfect for what we're talking about today. So for someone who hasn't read the article before, can you please give us an overview of what it's about and just tell us what inspired you to write it?
Well, I have worked from home for a long period of time whilst raising small kids, so it's not unusual for me to kind of manage the conflicting demands of home and small kids. And in the meantime, I developed and suffered quite severely from burnout. So I really wanted to share the learnings that I had with your readers and with the people who follow Kiddopedia, to help kind of share some very basic tips and insights into how to reframe the situation, look at things from another angle, develop some simple rituals and practices that you can build into your day, which will enable you to kind of let's say counterbalance some of that stress and anxiety and overwhelm that would be, coming through. And as I said earlier, burnout does manifest in many different ways. And if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, you can be walking towards burnout. If you're starting to feel physically exhausted or, on your way to chronic fatigue, you can kind of catch those things before they come too severe, because unfortunately, once you've gone into the severe end of adrenal burnout or chronic fatigue, the time to recover is very, very long. And not only that, you have damaged your body for a relatively long period of time, thereby increasing your risk of getting other chronic illnesses and such as cancer, etc. So, I'm passionate about that message, is to prioritize your health and well-being above all else, to enable you to live a healthier, longer, happier life, for not just for yourself, but for your children as well.
Now, so the things that you've spoken about before about your experience, is that what inspired you to write your book, Broken to Unbreakable?
Yes,
I'd love to know.
So I did hit the wall massively, and I wrote down my 12 steps to an unbreakable mind, body and spirit, and I followed those 12 steps, and I've transformed my own health. And in transforming my own health, I felt inspired and more connected to the world around me, and a healthier mindset came along with that. So, I feel like I have gone from broken to unbreakable, in that now I have the tools and the resources and the physical health to kind of weather any storm that kind of comes up in my life. And it's not to say that you won't still be challenged, or you won't still feel stressed from time to time, or you won't still come up with a cold and flu, but you actually then have more coping resources and mechanisms around you to kind of deal with that. And I feel there's a lot of strong messages throughout the book that will help people, but all on a mental, physical and spiritual level, to kind of reconnect what's most important in their life, which is what I did, which ultimately transformed my health.
And do you think it starts with people actually just being honest about how they're feeling to themselves, not to anyone else? I mean, you've got to be honest with yourself about how you're feeling. And just going back to what we were saying before about wearing the badge of honor and being busy, and everyone likes to be able to be busy. But it can be quite confronting sometimes to actually to sit and have that moment to yourself, to actually be honest and say, I'm actually feeling this. So does the book and your tips sort of help you sort of work through that initially and or not? I don't know.
Yes, because the introduction on the book in the book talks about that quite a lot before we go into the 12 steps, because I really want people to understand that we're all responsible for ourselves, and self is, in my view, sensible expectations last forever. That's my definition of the word self. And if we're accountable and we show up for ourselves in the right way, and we assume total accountability for our health and well-being, you're then going to start making the decisions which are right for you, but also enable you to live healthier. Because what you don't want to do is to fall into the trap of making all the unhealthy and bad choices, in the years when you can be positively influencing yourself, and found that you've caused long-term detrimental effect to your health and well-being. So it really starts, with yourself and making the decision. And ultimately, all I did was decide, I want to get healthy. And when I made the decision, I want to get healthy, and I wrote down those 12 steps, everything else fell into place, because I had made the decision. And, it's not a boot camp, and it's not a detox, and it's not, 12 minutes to run 5 kilometers. It's not like that. It's actually much going in more spiritual side and asking yourself those difficult questions, and then being accountable for the answers. Why am I feeling like this? What do I want to get out of this? What's important to me? How do I...
Yourself, of actually asking yourself those questions and being honest with yourself.
And I prompt a lot of the questions in the book to kind of help guide people on the process, because if you've never kind of done that self-reflection before, you can find that challenging, and I probably did as well. And it was really through my own reading and learning that I was able to start kind of, and I'm a relatively curious person, to start asking myself those really hard questions. And to admit that I had worn exhaustion as a badge of honor, worn being busy as a badge of honor, and almost worn my burnout as a badge of honor. And I didn't want to carry those badges anymore. I wanted to have a whole fresh new slate. So that's where it came about.
Well, with that message then, and with so many families home in isolation, how can we encourage mums, dads, carers to prioritise their self-care at the moment?
It is a really good question, and I like to think that everybody's self-care routine is slightly different based on their circumstances, and often I think self-care is a broad term that fundamentally people may not know how to execute on a very practical level. So it's about looking at what are the things that cause you to feel exhausted and those that cause you to feel fulfilled. And I mentioned about the concept of sustainers and drainers. So looking at what sustains you, physically, emotionally, mentally, looking at what drains you physically, emotionally, and mentally. And for some people, hanging out the washing is quite draining, whereas for other people, watering the lawn is quite sustaining. So it's really about looking at, little things like that you're having to deal with in the home at the moment. And I just draw a simple table with the two columns, sustainers on one side, drainers on the other. And I write down what sustains me, and on the other side I write down what drains me. Now often what happens is when we get very busy and very stressed is our sustainers quickly get dropped. And we're then just left with our drainers, and that's kind of really, really common. So even simple things like I developed this little list which is called 10 tips for self-care in 10 minutes. Yep. Because it's not difficult to do self-care in 10-minute intervals, and if you had 10 lots of 10 minutes throughout the day accumulatively, you would end up with 100 minutes of self-care a day, which is an amazing thing to aspire to. Yep. But to do it really simply, you can go, well, herbal tea o'clock, that's 10 minutes. Fruit o'clock, of having a fruit snack. Nature o'clock, sitting or walking outside. Inspire o'clock, sharing your favorite quote, song or poem. So you can see where I'm going with this, stretching and being calm and just having, these 10-minute intervals punctuated throughout your day, so that by the end of the day, you have given yourself, moments of self-care, and you're not saving it all up for the end of the week or the end of the night when the kids are in bed. You kind of need to recognize and punctuate and notice throughout the day how you're feeling and checking in with yourself.
So that would be a really good thing to print off and put on the fridge or something like that, because I think when we constantly see those messages, it's like, and or other family members can help you sort of make you accountable, because it's sometimes with when you've got a lot of conflicting priorities happening, unless you actually make the time for those types of self-care or anything in our life, we actually have to block out that time. So I think it's that would be really quite useful, and I'd love to be able to have a link or something like that in the show notes to it, actually. Yes. Which would be just fantastic.
Yes, I'd love to. And number 7 is inspired by my daughter, who wants to do dance battles every day. So number 7 is dance and hug a clock, because when we hug people, we release oxytocin, which is good for our body, and when we dance, we exercise and we have fun. So it's little things like that you can do and get the kids involved, and these are fun things that we can do. I was homeschooled for 6 years of my life, from year 1 to year 6, by 2 busy working parents. And, I learned all life skills, how to milk cows and how to bake and how to, sew and how to do all these things, which are kind of, lost in a lot of generations today. And I think it's really important at the moment to kind of go back to that more basic holistic way of living and looking at, okay, well, what are we doing on a daily basis that, is something that we can pass on to our kids, or something that we can reflect on and share that was special to us as we were growing up. And I've certainly been trying to do that with my girls whilst we've been home, and making up games that I love to play, hide and seek in the house when I was a kid. So we've been playing a lot of hide and seek in the house, but yes, it is a good time as well.
Well, that is something that we're speaking to a lot of the experts about, and they have been saying also, during this time, that if parents are concerned about their children not learning academically. It's about understanding and seeing, while there are lessons in every moment of our lives that parents and carers and grandparents can be providing children to understand the lesson of resilience, the lesson of patience, and everything else that you mentioned as well. So it's not necessarily just learning academically is the only education that children have, so I think that's a really valid point what you were saying before, is just to open our eyes and think laterally and really just put that lens of perspective of, there's so many things that parents can be teaching their kids at this time, and the lesson of values and all those kinds of things as well. So, and you've given us some really wonderful information today. If you were to summarize, I guess, your key messages for any listener, what would they be?
Well, fundamentally, prioritizing our health and wellness is the most important thing in the world as far as I'm concerned. And recognizing if you're not feeling healthy or well, it's important now to kind of take some steps to rectify that while you can. We have this break in our frenetic pace in order to kind of do a little bit of internal reflection, as well as maybe do emotional deep dive and look at really where you are in your life. To develop a wellness mindset if you don't already have one, and to think, how am I going to nourish my body? How am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to build my immune system? What support structure do I need for my day-to-day as well as in my life generally? These are all wellness questions and a wellness mindset that we can start to adopt. To recognize if you are suffering from burnout and to take some steps to rectify that now and for the long term, and to understand really the impact that stress has on you on a physical level, but also on a mental and emotional level, because the World Health Organization says that stress is the epidemic of the 21st century, and 9.6 million people around the world die of cancer each year, much of it related to stress. Now, that's a much higher annual death toll than we'll probably end up with from COVID, but the statistics are staggering if you think about that. So, really prioritizing our health and our well-being and minimizing stress and the impacts of stress will really help us kind of come out on the other side of this feeling a lot better about, where we are at this time.
And I guess for anyone listening, I guess having a moment of just of thinking to yourself, what have been the key takeaways for you? What are you going to do to adapt a wellness mindset for you and your family? And where can you start? I always think that the best thing is to have a moment where you can take some time, make yourself a cup of tea, a hot chocolate, coffee, whatever it is that you drink, get out a pen and paper. And I think starting with what you mentioned before, which is making a list and writing, having that line in between the middle of the paper and making a list of the things that give you energy and the things that take energy from you, and having that moment of being really quite honest with yourself, and then working out that if you are constantly putting energy out, at some point you are going to be drained and naturally that you are going to be burnt out. So what is it that actually gives you energy, and how can you ensure that you are sort of doing like for like and one for one to ensure that you are balanced and that you are the best version of yourself for your family and your friends. But I think, just as you mentioned before, adapting a wellness mindset is something that so many of us don't do and don't put priority on. And it's always until it's too late, until we are sick, and then we now we've got to look after ourselves. We take it for granted that we do have our health and have the ability and the capacity to be able to do and live these crazy busy lives. And hopefully this time of home isolation is giving lots of people the opportunity to reassess their values and their beliefs and the things that really do matter to them. And this is a really, really important and great start. So grateful for the messages that you've given us today. Now, if people want to access your book, is it available to purchase, or are we still in the pre-sales, or where are we at the moment?
So the audio version is winging its way around the world as we speak. So that's available to purchase via my website, which is thewellnesspoet.com. The printed version, you can order your copy. I'm doing the final layout proofs this week, so hopefully we'll have the printed copies back in the next 3 weeks. And you can pre-order that on my website, and I will send you a copy. and it will be available online and in some bookstores as well. So the audiobook is currently being uploaded to all major platforms like Audible and iTunes. It's on audiobooks.com just now, and also through my website, so thewellnesspoet.com. And I love that I wanted to push the audio book out there as quickly as possible, because it is content that people can consume whilst they're in lockdown. They don't need to physically leave their house to go and get a copy. And in 5 hours, they will hear all the content and then hopefully start to implement the suggestions, the practical elements and the hips and hints throughout the book.
Okay, well, let's get all of those links in the show notes so as many people as possible can have access to it. So grateful for your time, and really can't wait to chat with you again. Thanks, Krissy. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.